Hi, I'm Patricia Grabarek.
And I'm Katina Sawyer, and welcome to the Worker Being Podcast.
So, Katina, I would love to hear a little bit about the article you have prepared for us.
Yes, so today we're going to be talking about the different work-family strategies that specifically dual earner couples that have young children used during COVID when their child no longer had daycare or the ability to go into school. So when their child was remote and they were remote or partially remote, how did couples split the childcare and how did that impact their health outcomes? And the results are kind of interesting because it has some implications for how people might want to try to split childcare even beyond COVID.
That's so interesting. I really think that the implications piece is going to be important. I'm starting to see a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, assuming the variants don't take over and destroy any progress we've made.
Yes.
But
True.
Hopefully we're moving in the right direction. So I hope that we can take these types of articles like the one you're about to share and apply what we've learned into our day-to-day life and not just go back to normal. I think that's huge. That's something I've been thinking about a lot, not just in the workplace, obviously, being more flexible, providing remote work opportunities, things like that have been very important during this and hopefully will continue. But also I was just thinking about our environment and the days when nobody was driving and how clean the air was and all that fun stuff.
True. That is very, very true. That there could be some learnings beyond this time period that we might want to apply. Something that was really awful was that we were stuck inside, but something that was really great was that the effects on the environment were really positive. So maybe we can think about ways to be more green moving forward, or it was really difficult adjusting to, everybody being remote or people being much more remote than they were before. And when we go back to the way things were, if people are going back to the way things were, maybe thinking about, well, what did we learn from what we did that we might still be able to apply that will help us to better manage moving forward. So I think that you're right. There are some things that came out of this that are learnings, positive learnings. And it's important not to just forget those and go back to the exact way things were, because I think we have taken away some things from this period of time.
Yeah. I'm not going to go on to a long tangent about that because I do think it's really important. And I'm excited to hear about your article and why we need to be thinking about the way we split childcare. And I think that's a topic that was important before COVID. And hopefully this study can help influence what we do now while we're still dealing with it. And then as we move forward. But before we dive into that, I just want to quick check in. How are you doing?
I'm doing lovely. As I mentioned to you earlier, I am getting my vaccine on Wednesday, the first dose of my vaccine on Wednesday.
Yay!
And I know you're going to be done tomorrow.
Yes.
So the worker bees are almost COVID resistant.
I can't wait.
That's super nice. I know. I'm really excited to just obviously it's a weight lifted to know at least, you and, my mom has it now and hopefully my dad will be able to get it soon. And so our family is slowly starting to get it. And it would be really nice if everyone in my extended family was able to get it by the summer and we could all get together for 4th of July. That would be nice, because my family's big. So when we get together with my extended family, it's 20 something people. So we haven't been able to do that in obviously over a year. So that will be really nice. Hopefully that's a possibility in the nearer future.
I hope so. I hope you get there. We are really lucky because we're actually going to be getting together for Easter, which is very soon because I'll be done. My parents are completely done. Danny's going to be done at the same time as me. My aunt and uncle, that live in San Diego, they're completely done. My sister has her first dose. My cousin has her first dose. My other aunt already had COVID, and hopefully she gets her first dose soon, but she's already kind of in an antibody state, if you will.
Right.
So a lot of us are already there or close to being there. So we're actually doing like a little Easter get together.
That's awesome.
I mean, my family's not as large as yours. You know, a lot of my family is not in the States. So,
right.
So it is smaller, but everybody that we haven't seen, that we didn't see at Christmas and we didn't see at Thanksgiving, we're going to be able to see at Easter. So I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's awesome. It is really exciting. And I think the only people, so almost all of my aunts and uncles have it now. And it's just harder because my cousins, like my youngest cousin is 21. So it'll be a bit before they get to like 21-year-olds with no pre-existing conditions. So we'll see. But the hope is that everybody is ready to get together by the summertime. That's kind of the goal that we set in our minds. And if it's before that, that would be great too. But that was kind of the initial goal that we were like thinking is like, okay, if we're all done by July, that would be so nice. We can have like a big barbecue and get together and it'll be so fun. So that's the goal. We will see, but I am very excited about getting started. And, you know, so far so good with people that we know in terms of like side effects and things like that. Seems fairly mild. So I am feeling good about it.
Yeah, I'll have to let you know if I wake up Wednesday morning and I feel a little feverish or something. I'm a little bit anxious about that. I mean, it's not a big deal. Like I can have a fever, a low-grade fever for a day versus getting COVID. It's not a big deal, but because I've been so isolated, I guess is the word, because I've just been really at home pretty much 100% of the time over the past year, I haven't been sick, right? I haven't, like, not only have I not had a COVID, but I haven't had a cold. I haven't had anything. And so I feel like having even just like a mild symptom is going to feel really awful because I just haven't had them.
I know. I was thinking that too, because I also haven't had a cold in over a year. And like, it's just odd. Like that's never happened to me. It is funny though. I think we've talked about this before, but it's just like one of those things where like when we used to travel all the time, you'd just be like, oh, and you travel, you just get sick. Like that's it. And now I'm kind of like, well, we could do something about that. Like we don't have to get sick when we get on planes a lot. Like that's an interesting learning. Speaking of learnings, but yeah, I do think it'll be really interesting to see what happens with the side effects as well, because my mom was saying a lot of people, you also just think about it more. So like the second dose, like people are like, you know, I think I had some headaches, but also like maybe I usually have a little bit of a headache, but like I was just thinking about, you know, like, cause then you're like thinking like, is this a side effect? Is this a side effect? And like, so fever, obviously, you know, if it's a side effect, but like, sometimes just your normal state, you can feel like kind of weird. And then like, but you don't think about it. And then when you're trying to figure out if you're having side effects, you're like thinking about every single thing as like, I'm tired. Am I fatigued? I don't know. Maybe this is fatigue. You know, it's like, you don't know. So that's kind of interesting too.
Totally. I even did that with the first one. Like the only thing I can really say that happened is that when I would lift my arm up in the air, it would feel heavy. It wouldn't like hurt. It would just feel kind of, it's like I noticed it. It's like, I don't know how to explain it better than that. It's like I lift my other arm up and you don't like feel it the same way. So that was the one thing. But then a few days later, I was like, man, you know, I've been tired the past couple of days. And I don't know why. I don't know what I'm doing differently. And granted, I am now in the beginning of week 4 of a new job. So it could have been that.
Yeah, I think that might be.
Yeah, probably.
Related.
Probably. But there was a moment where I was like, it could be that, but it could have also been the vaccine. And I just didn't even think about it until later.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, you just like don't really know. And that's what, I mean, whenever I think about like, just even during this whole time period, if you think you have COVID, for example, if you're like, oh my God, maybe I like every like little, like, I'm like, my nose usually isn't stuffy, but like, obviously sometimes it is, because throughout this period of time of a year, like maybe I would have a stuffy nose for like a day and I'd be like, oh my God, I'm getting COVID. And then like, it would just go away. And I'd be like, oh, okay. Like, I guess sometimes I just have a stuffy nose, but like, I don't pay attention to it like that.
Yeah. It is really funny. Oh, good old placebo effect too, because as soon
I
as you
know.
think you have it, you like start convincing yourself, and then it's all of a sudden it's like, well, but now I'm achy too, and now I've got
Right.
this, and now I've got that, and you're just like, no, you don't, you're fine.
No, my body just fails me on a regular basis, and I pay no attention to it.
Oh my gosh,
It's
totally.
true.
Well, tell us about COVID and families and childcare and all that good stuff.
Yes. Okay. So basically what this paper looks at is it was an interesting time period to study work and family because everything got disrupted, right? So when things get disrupted, people change their routines around to adjust and adapt to the disruption. And so the idea of doing this study to look at how people sort of adapted to changes in their work was to take a look at how people adapted and what kind of profile they fell into in terms of how they split work. And these are all heterosexual couples. So they're looking at sort of more traditional gender dynamics. And they're looking at how these couples sort of started to split work during COVID from a childcare perspective and whether or not that had an impact on their health a period of time later. And so the idea is that, we know that people have things set up in a certain way, but this allowed them to look at a variety of profiles that people don't generally engage in because they may have things set up in a more traditional way, but then they couldn't do it that way. Or, they may try something newer or more innovative because they're in a unique situation where it may end up working during this period of time. And then moving forward, they might also like learn something new about, oh, this is actually a helpful reaction to what's going on around me. So it gave like a really cool way of looking at a variety of different ways to manage work and life that didn't really emerge in the literature before this time period.
That's awesome. So it's something we can definitely take forward and use in the future beyond what we're doing now, and just because we've had an interesting time to find this stuff.
Yep, exactly. So basically, they're really interested in looking at whether or not people preserve more traditional gendered patterns, which for folks who are listening who don't know, in even now, in couples that are, younger. And in this study, everyone in the study had a child who was age 6 or under and whose childcare was no longer available during this period. So whether that was that they were remote schooling or whether they were just, had to be home from daycare, whatever the case may be, their childcare arrangement was no longer available. But even in couples that are, ostensibly these couples were pretty young and they have a young child at home. Even in couples that you would think, okay, it's less maybe traditional, they grew up with less traditional gender norms. Still, even when both people in the couple are working, when it comes to childcare, women still tend to bear the brunt of childcare much more than men do. And so one thought was, does this disrupt the way that people are arranging things? Because the child is literally now in the home with both parents, and it becomes harder for the male in the relationship to create a boundary between work and life, whereas previously it may have been easier for the woman to have set up her schedule to be able to respond to childcare demands, and they sort of had that worked out that way. But now it's like everybody's in the same house in the same boat. So does that change how and when people pitch in? So one thought is no. Maybe it doesn't change the way that people pitch in because the same ideologies are operating. So regardless of whether or not you're in the same space and these things are confronting you right in the face, it would still be that people would split things more traditionally. But there's another opportunity where these situational demands might disrupt the norms because, again, you literally can't keep separate spaces. You may have to make decisions together in a way of dealing with this crisis. And in making those decisions together, it may involve more of both partners making decisions about their work and their home lives. And so it may create an opportunity for like renegotiation of those boundaries in a way that might be more favorable or more equitable for both partners involved. And then the last is that when people adapt to crisis situations, they're more likely to accept shifting patterns. So if people know they're in a crisis, they're more likely to be like, okay, things are not going to be the same as they always are. And they're more open to the idea of restructuring things. So it could be that people continue to cling to tradition in this instance, or it could be that this provides an opportunity where people are really going to renegotiate these boundaries and these new ways of doing things will emerge.
So I don't want to do a big spoiler alert here, but I'm going to take a guess.
Yes.
Because we have a lot of data already that I'm assuming many listeners have probably seen, that women are generally exiting the workforce at much higher rates during this pandemic. Some is from job loss, but some of it is voluntary. And a lot of what we're seeing is that people are leaving because of childcare burden. So I'm going to guess that it hasn't had as big of an impact on changing and disrupting norms as maybe me and my dream world would like it to have.
Yes, I think that you are correct about that. Indeed, a majority of couples continue to split things in a more gendered way, or a large percentage of the sample did. But in the other portion of the sample that did decide to split things differently, we actually learned something interesting about what seems to be a more feasible strategy for splitting work and family from a health perspective. So they looked at, so I'll just tell you a little bit about what they did.
Yeah.
So they asked people to respond to 3 open-ended questions to ask about their plan for dealing with their work and childcare. So they asked, what is you and your spouse's plan for dealing with both of your work commitments during the upcoming period when your normal childcare is disrupted? Please be as detailed as possible. How will you have to adjust your work role during this time? And how will your spouse have to adjust his or her work role during this time? So they asked people those questions in March, and it was in mid to late March, which was the week that aligned with when childcare had just shut down. So they actually captured it right at the period of time where people would have been making these plans.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
I just like that.
So good timing.
That timing, yeah, that timing is perfect.
Yeah, something tells me they had thought to do that.
I was gonna say, like, I feel like they must have had already been planning to do a different study and maybe just change the questions and we're like, scramble, because I don't know how you do that so quickly.
Yeah, that's very possible. They also could have been thinking at the very, very beginning of COVID, they could have been thinking, let's do something on work and family, and then thought, like, we'll administer the survey right now because this seems to be the most meaningful time as people are trying to figure this out. And the authors, oh my gosh, wait, I never even said the name of this article.
Oh no, I forgot you
God.
didn't. Okay, well, we're back up.
It's called Work Family Strategies During COVID-19, Examining Gender Dynamics Among Dual Earner Couples with Young Children. And it's by Kristen Shockley, Melissa Clark, Hope Dodd, and Eden King. And it just came out in the Journal of Applied Psychology. So I know most of those people pretty well.
Yeah.
And so the other thing that I can tell you is that I think for the most part, they were dealing with this themselves at this time. So,
Got it.
So I think it probably was top of mind for them too, that this would be a period of time where you would be having these discussions and conversations because I think most of them have young children. So anyway, that may also have something to do with it, that it was like not me search, but, you know, kind of.
Yeah. I actually think that's really interesting too, because, well, it is interesting that it may have come from, you know, the situation they're dealing with. But the point you just made is interesting around how people are having these conversations because they have to. That's something I hadn't really thought about, like, directly, like indirectly I did. But this is a really perfect time because you get everybody at the same time having discussions, right? Like, when people are typically moving through their marriage or their relationship and they're about to have a baby, you know, there might be some conversation and things just kind of evolve over time. But when suddenly something changes and you have to discuss it, like, that's a really interesting time period to see what happens.
Yeah. And we rarely get an event that impacts everybody so broadly in a national context at once, right?
Totally.
So it really is a unique opportunity to look at these kinds of disruptions. So they gathered that in March, and then in the middle of May, they gathered time 2, which was asking people about their family functioning. So they had them rate their family cohesion, their marital relationship, their sleep quantity, their psychological distress, and their self-rated job performance. The last thing that they did was that they also asked them, hey, we asked you about your plan for coping with this, 8 weeks ago or whatever. Here's what you said. So they had it pipe the text that they put from the prior survey into the survey. Please tell us on a scale of 1 to 10 how much you stuck with that plan. And anybody who put less than a 6, they removed from the study. So they asked them about their plan, but then they verified that they stuck with that plan.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you have to make sure that they're doing it. I was curious. I was about to see if they were asking like what they did instead, but no, you needed to stick to the plan that you said initially. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. And then basically they looked at, okay, now we can see whether or not the plan has something to do with these other health outcomes, or, obviously if you didn't stick with your plan, then it's due to something else, right?
Then who knows, right? Yeah.
Right, exactly. So they got rid of anybody who didn't stick to their plan because it wasn't possible for them to know like what was due to the plan and what wasn't.
Yeah.
So basically they took those qualitative responses that everybody provided, and they coded them for themes regarding how people split their work. And specifically they coded them whether or not the person was working remote. So if the wife and the husband were working remote, whether they had outside help, whether they did what's called a shift change. So whether they changed the times that they were working, whether they changed the amount of hours that they were working, and whether they changed the way that they split their labor at home. And then they entered those so they coded that made it numeric, and then they made profiles. So not to get too statistically complicated, but they did what's called a latent class analysis, which I know you know well, Patricia, because you did that in your dissertation.
Yep.
But basically they were able to shake out profiles. Basically there are different patterns that emerge in how couples split their work and their home work, their work and their homework. And they were able to group people according to those patterns to see whether or not what pattern you fall into actually has something to do with whether or not you end up healthier at the end. So I'll tell you what the patterns are, and then
I can't
we
wait.
can talk about, yes. So the first one is that the wife is working remote and the husband is not working remote, and the wife does everything. That was 22.2% of the sample. So the wife is home, the husband's not home, and the wife does everything. So there's some quotes like, I am working remotely from home and also caring for my 6-month-old and homeschooling my 9-year-old daughter. My husband works outside of the home. Or the husband says, I have to continue to go into work as it's deemed an essential business. So my spouse is currently conducting meetings with our son, playing in the background and doing what work she can late at night or early in the morning when he's asleep.
That sounds miserable.
Yeah,
oh my
it doesn't
gosh.
sound that fun, because basically the wife is still working, right? So
yeah,
she's just working from home. So that's a profile where the husband's going into work, the wife's at home, and she's doing all the childcare. That was 22% of the sample.
That's pretty big. That's a lot.
I know.
Yikes.
I know. I was kind of depressed by that. Then 16.6% of the sample is egalitarian remote workers with planned what they're calling mini shifts. So both of them are working remotely. They don't have help from anyone else. And in the other instance, they didn't have help from anyone else either. And what they're doing is they're sort of taking shifts where they're working or doing home stuff. So we're planning to take 2 to 3 hour shifts as needed, triage and complete only essential projects as needed, and work after our children go to bed or on the weekends if necessary. Or we will do split shifts, 4 hours each, and probably take a lot of emergency sick or vacation time and or unpaid leave. So they're basically splitting up their work and home by being like, this is when I'm working and you're going to take care of the kids during that time, and then we're going to switch.
I've seen people do this. This is the one that is pretty familiar to me because I have had coworkers that have done this where it's like, okay, they block their calendar that from 9 to 11, they can't do any meetings because they're setting up the kid for school and getting food and doing whatever. And then they're on at 11, and then the husband will go ahead and take care of lunch and do all that stuff until they switch again. So I've seen that one a few times.
Yeah. Yep. And so we're going to learn more about that. There's another one called egalitarian remote workers where they're both working remote with daily need-based alternation. So this is we take turns working while the other entertains the kids and vice versa. So they don't really have shift work, but they're not doing like you work from this time to this time and then I'm with the kids from this time to this time. They're just saying like based on our needs for that day, we're going to flex around who's watching them when. So, if I have a really important meeting, you can take them. If we both have a really important meeting, we'll figure it out. If neither of us do, maybe we, do a coin toss, whatever. So they're kind of alternating back and forth who's going to be watching after the kids during the workday.
So on that note, do we know if, we don't know if people actually split that evenly though, or if the wife would, or the female partner would be the one that ends up doing more, losing more of those coin tosses, if you will.
Yeah, they didn't measure hours, but the way they coded it was that both partners said that they alternate who's doing it based on meetings, deadlines, or child's needs. And it seemed like they were not really basing it on anything other than who was busier at that time. So they're calling it egalitarian. We don't know for sure what that looked like. That was 14.4% of the sample.
Interesting. Okay, so it seems like now we're over half the sample has been represented.
Yes. So 2 other categories that were each around 13% of the sample. One was alternating working days. So my wife works Monday, Wednesday. I work Tuesday, Thursday. We split Friday. And in this one, they reduced their hours. So they cut back their working hours. They're working a couple days a week each, alternating the days back and forth. And it was unclear here whether they were taking a pay cut or not, although they did control for salary in all their analyses. But it does seem like in both instances, they were like pedal to the metal the days they were working and then using the time that they had with their kids just to focus on that. So it was almost like a reduced work week kind of an idea, but it didn't seem like they were necessarily saying they were getting less done. It just seemed like they were being like extraordinarily focused on the days that they were working and then not as much at all on the other days.
I'm really curious. So you said that was 13%?
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if that actually maintained past the time period of the study, right? Because that's something that's doable maybe for the first couple months. But then let's say you're in a state where they actually stayed in pretty good lockdown most of this time for almost a year. I can't imagine that's sustainable long term.
Yes. And that's interesting that you say that because that is actually the one that ended up being like the best. But it also has something to do with the fact that they reduced hours, right? Which we could also talk about from a health perspective.
Totally, yeah. The reduced hours is a big impact there, but also, I don't know. It would be really interesting because I would love to see a follow-up study and see, like, did you continue this for a whole year? And if that's the case, then amazing. That's great that they were able to do that.
Yes, true. So, and they don't know how long the people are able to do it for any longer because all they know is what they did from March to May.
Right.
So we don't know the answer to that, but it is a very good question. So the last couple or the last few, one was where neither of them are working remote and basically they have someone taking care of their kids full time. So that was, they're both going into the office and someone's at their house all day taking care of their kids.
So it's more of a normal, like quote normal time period almost.
They're calling it outsourced is the title of it. So So that's basically, they have no other choice because their child's at home and they can't be home, right? So that's another model. The last 2 are where the wife is not working remote and the husband is working remote. That was in 10% of the sample. And in that one, they do alternating childcare schedules. So interestingly, in the one where the husband is going into the office and the wife is at home, the wife does everything. When it's reversed, it seems like in this 10% of couples, the wife is still doing a decent bit.
Of course.
Yes. Yes.
Doesn't surprise me, but okay.
Yes. And then another one is called wife remote and husband pitches in on occasion. And that is basically the wife that was 9.6% of the sample. Sample quote, I work primarily from home remotely while he goes into the office, but he will work from home on days that I have meetings that are extremely important so he can take care of the kids. So there was the smallest group was, hey, every now and again, I'll throw you a little bone and let you go to your important meeting. But that was only 9% of the sample.
I will say it's interesting, though, that the biggest percentage of the sample, if you roll it up, would be the ones that said they were going to be splitting it evenly.
Yes.
So that's kind of interesting because I anticipated it was going to be that majority of these different profiles of types of arrangements would be really focus on the woman doing most of the work, but it seems like there's actually a pretty good percentage of people that at least planned to be more egalitarian in their approach, and they claim to have done that over time, at least the first 2 months.
Yes, that's correct, which is interesting.
Yeah, I did not expect that. Like I said, I really expected that 22% I thought it was going to be wife remote and doing everything while husband goes in, and both are at home, and wife does everything for childcare too.
Yeah.
But that wasn't a group.
No, exactly. So it does seem like people are doing some more interesting things. While about 37% of the sample use traditional gendered strategies, and then another portion of the sample used some sort of in-between strategies. There were 3 egalitarian strategies that emerged that comprised 44.5% of the sample. So that's actually not so bad, right? 45% of the sample picked something other than what would be very gendered or somewhere in between. So what did they find? Okay, so basically they found significant differences in all outcomes. Except nothing predicted how much sleep the husband got and how the husband saw his job performance playing out, which is kind of interesting.
That is interesting.
That didn't impact anything, or that wasn't impacted by anything. For relationship outcomes, husbands and wives in the wife working remote doing the most group tended to fare among the best, whereas both husbands and wives in the wife remote and does it all group fared the worst.
So say the first one again?
Yes. So in the first one, husbands in the wife remote doing the most group tended to fare among the best, whereas both husbands and wives in the wife remote and does it all group fared the worst. That sentence doesn't actually make sense to me right now.
Yeah, I was like, wait, what?
Relationship outcomes. So it looks like basically what they're saying is that wives do the worst in the wife remote and does it all group, whereas that wasn't the case in the wife remote doing most group.
Okay, so when the husband pitches in every once in a while.
Exactly. It seems to help.
Yes. But when the wife does it all, it is obviously not a good thing.
Exactly. And the remote mini shifts couples had higher relationship tension compared to other people. So that may be because they're like doing these like micro negotiations all day. So you think about like, I'm doing this mini shift. So maybe I am, supposed to be on, but maybe I'm not. We don't really know. And we're like trying to decide in the moment whose stuff is more important. It seems like that led to more relationship tension, which kind of makes sense. So
yeah,
the
I
idea
could see
of
that.
like kind of figuring out on the fly doesn't seem to be the best. Overall, the highest health outcomes with regard to sleep and psychological distress for both husbands and wives was the alternating days group.
The ones that didn't work full time.
Yes, exactly. So the reduced hours and sort of segmenting seem to have the best health outcomes.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yes. So so women, if you're in the remote does it all category, that is the worst scenario. If you're a woman, you're working and you're still doing it all, that's bad. They found that group had the lowest everything, which is interesting. So that was not positive for women. So if you care about the women in your life, don't make them do that. But men in those couples also had some negative outcomes as well. So it's not just they had lower family cohesion and fairly high relationship tension. So it's not that men in those situations get away scot-free either. And they kind of say that that's because they think that their wives are mad.
Shocking. Their wives are mad that they're doing it all. Yeah.
Exactly.
Not surprising at all. I'm just trying to think through it. Like, I mean, it makes sense there would be some tension there. It makes sense that would be the worst condition. And to me, this feels like, and of course, we don't have the data to back this up, so don't quote me, but given that we've seen over the length of the pandemic, women are dropping out of the workforce at a higher rate, feels like this is probably the group that is, because they're already at home and they don't really have any support. So I can imagine that group is the one that, after these 2 months, after May, they keep getting worse and worse and eventually just can't maintain their jobs too.
Yes, exactly. So basically that is the worst outcome. When the husband pitches in, sometimes it makes things a little bit better. So at least do that. And of the remote mini shifts, the need-based alternating, and the alternating days, the best of all was the alternating days. So as we mentioned, they had the highest means on all outcomes, significantly better than the mini shifts or the need-based alternating, although the need-based alternating did slightly better than the remote mini shifts. So sort of breaking things up into, I work from this time to this time, and then I watch the kids from this time to this time, instead of kind of operating in accordance to what your day might be like on any given day, didn't seem to fare as well. So it seemed to make more sense to try to tailor it. But in the process of tailoring it at all from on a daily basis, like a shift work or a responsive strategy seemed to create more problems compared to this day I work, this day I'm home schedule.
And that makes a lot of sense. I just even think about, I mean, I don't have any kids, but I just think about housework. Like if Danny and I are both really busy and we know we have a couple of things that we have to get done, then you're negotiating like, well, what time do you have this and what time do you have that? And like, no matter what, like that's not mini shifts because we don't have a specific time that things have to happen, but it gets to that like needs-based one. Sometimes it's annoying because it's like, well, my thing is important too, and I can't do that right now. Or really it's usually me saying that I don't have time and you have to do it. But let's be real. I'll be honest. And sometimes I am not thinking about, because his work is more freelance, so it's not as consistent. So I always assume he's more available, and that's not always true. Regardless, that's just a personal tangent I'm going on. But point is that having that constant back and forth, if there's some stuff that has to get done that we, for whatever reason is urgent, it's not that often, but when it does happen, that can create tension because we're both stressed out about being busy at work, and then we have this thing on top of it. So if you're doing that every single day, that can definitely be exhausting. I can imagine that. Plus, and then when you get to the mini shifts, to your point, if you're not tailoring your day to the needs, then you might be put in a weird situation at work, right? If you only work from 9 to 11 every single day, but you have weekly meetings that have been starting to be scheduled at 12 and you can't, fluctuate on Thursday to do a 12 o'clock meeting, then that could be stressful too. So I get why those two would be bad.
Yeah. So it seems like it's like being rigid about what time of day you work and don't work can cause problems, and being on the fly, it seems like a daily schedule where you have on off throughout the day doesn't work as well as a full day on, a full day off, is basically what they're saying. That in those instances, you're either, maybe you're on a schedule that doesn't really make sense given the work that you're doing, because your every day is kind of different. And so following this like strict schedule doesn't really allow you to make the most of each day. Or like if you're trying to just respond according to the day, then like each day you're kind of negotiating whose stuff is more important at what time.
Yeah.
And so that causes some problems too. But if you know you're home one day and off one day, that, you know, helps. So anyway, I think that it's interesting to think through, because this was also the group that reduced their work hours. So they can't really tell what it is that's helping the health, whether it's the reduced work hours or just the separation of work and family and the clarity of like what realm you're in. But they do suggest that these folks seem to think that their performance was pretty good during this period of time. Now, that doesn't mean that they necessarily think they're performing the same. But it does suggest that they're not thinking that they're really falling behind here. And they're asking them, you know, did you meet the performance metric that they're using is both a regular one, like how well do you think you're performing? But also they asked what percentage of your work responsibilities do you feel you met this week from 0 to 100%. So they don't have a way of knowing whether their work responsibilities, whether what's expected of them has been lessened since they reduced their work hours. So they feel like they're getting done 100% of whatever percentage they used to do. But they do suggest that in combination with research on reduced work weeks, actually allowing people to get done similar amounts of work and just waste less time, that it could be possible that when people really know, like, okay, this is when I'm on for work and this is when I'm off for work, that they're putting as much time and energy and focus into it when they're there, because they know that the next day they're going to have the opportunity to be home. So they do suggest that that's an area for further research, because it may be the case that from a policy perspective, and they talk about this, that policy can help people to understand how much we might be able to actually create this alternating days strategy for people on a regular basis without sacrificing performance. So is there a way to actually reduce a work week to 4 days or 3 days for people and have them like really get it done on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, be home Tuesday, Thursday, and people could actually set up this alternating schedule to fit their needs more clearly?
I mean, we've done a lot of, well, we've written and talked about reduced work week, and I think there's an argument to be made that that is probably what's helping a lot of the situation here. And I agree. I think it'd be interesting to do more research to find out, is it the reduced work week? Is it a combination of both, right? Having your partner also participate equally in your childcare work and being able to focus fully when it is your day to work. I think it's really interesting, but I can imagine that in some cases people are performing at the same level, right? There's nothing in the research to show that they wouldn't be, and maybe the days that they're on, they are working longer hours, like that's completely possible, but because they have that recovery after it with a day off, which I know has childcare, so it's not full recovery, but there's some recovery, and you're able to not overwhelm yourself with a million responsibilities in one moment. I can see that really, really benefiting both parties. And then obviously the child too, because the child doesn't have distracted parents either. I know they didn't study that, but I have a feeling that's helpful if their childcare is more focused on the child when that's happening.
Yeah. So it seems like that's what helps from a health perspective and a performance perspective. Generally, the takeaways that they kind of close with are that, you know, this crisis situation created a really rare opportunity to look at how people might negotiate or renegotiate home and work in heterosexual couples. Unfortunately, they found that a large percentage of the sample continued these gendered patterns of childcare, and the data do suggest that the burden of childcare responsibilities do disproportionately fall on mothers. There were not categories that we saw for the mother doing way less. So that's not something that we found. But when the parents did engage in these more egalitarian strategies for managing their childcare, they were able to, create a new way of doing things that maybe in the long term would have some benefits, particularly when they're able to alternate their work days. And it seems like there are ways to protect performance and well-being for both people in the couple that are better than the more gendered ways of doing things that we might learn from and preserve moving forward if we can.
Yeah, I love that. I really think we need to take that learning and apply it. So I think, well, not only can organizations think about the policies they have in place and the types of flexibility and structure they can provide, but then couples that are listening should also think about, well, couples with small children, but also it could apply to housework and different things probably too. But couples really can take this and think about how they can apply it and make sure that they're doing this, splitting work in the most egalitarian way that they can. So hopefully if you are stuck in a system for in your household that doesn't make as much sense, you can take this and reopen that conversation and try to readjust to what's going to be better for everybody in the long run.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's perfectly aligned with what they are suggesting here. So hopefully this is helpful for everyone to think or rethink the way that they're splitting things up and whether or not that is a way that will have positive health benefits for everyone.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this. I enjoyed the article. I think it's really interesting and new and fresh.
Well, thank you for listening to my new and fresh article.
Yes. Well, you're welcome. Of course, we'll always listen, and hopefully everyone else will too. If you liked what you heard today, we'd love for you to subscribe to our podcast, share it with a friend that maybe can learn from it as well, and leave us a review online. It really helps our podcast to be seen by others, and we would really appreciate it. We also want you to reach out to us. If you have any questions, concerns, thoughts, please let us know. You can email us at contact@workerbeing.com. You can find us on our website, workerbeing.com. You can also find us on social media at workerbeing on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And finally, wanted to remind you that we have some courses available online. If you're interested in learning how to manage your stress, for example, that course is completely free to use. So we'll have a link in our show notes if you're interested in taking it. And we hope to hear from all of you soon. Thanks for listening. The Worker Being podcast is hosted by us, Patricia Grabarek
and Katina Sawyer, and produced by Allie Johnson.